We want to give you the authority to write a good rule. We want you to fix the rule. We want a clean air standard. We don't want to change the result, but we want enough time for you to write the rule. We want you to be able to write the right method so companies can comply, and we want to give companies enough time to do the job.
Senator, you consumed your 4.5 minutes.
I beg pardon?
Time you asked.
Thank you very much. So, Madam President, this is a rare piece of legislation, something we agree on across the aisle that could immediately save 340,000 jobs, that keeps the clean air rule that the EPA has proposed, but simply gives them time to write it properly, the authority to write it properly, and businesses the opportunity to comply with it within a reasonable period of time. I hope we will adopt it. I thank the President, and I yield the floor. I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with and that we be recognized to engage in a colloquy with Senator Coons for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We're going to start today by talking about job creation in America, and I'd like to turn it over to Senator Coons to begin this conversation about a very important piece of legislation we filed jointly yesterday.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, and thank you, Madam President. Senator Rubio and I have come to the floor today to talk about our shared experience. In my home state of Florida, over the 1 year that I have been a senator, and over the years before that I served in county government, I have heard from hundreds, even thousands, of families and individuals looking for work, deeply hurt and challenged by the ongoing slow economic recovery, folks who've come to us asking for opportunities, for assistance, for promise and hope. And in reality, I think one of the things that is causing some real concern in this country, in my state and most likely, Madam President, yours, and I think most likely in Senator Rubio's as well, is a broadly shared concern that we here in the Capitol, we in Congress, are not capable of getting past the partisan politics and making real progress in tackling the job-creating challenges before us. Let me, if I could, quote from a couple of letters that I've received from Delawareans just in the last few months. Lawrence from Milford wrote my office, "Congress needs to stop the political arguing and take positive action to make America and our economy strong again." Janet from Wilmington wrote, "I'm the owner of a very small business. I've been in business 29 years, and I've never seen it as tough as it is today." And Joseph in Smyrna summed it all up in a letter he wrote, "Our economy needs jobs now." Delaware is a great place to grow a business, to raise a family, to achieve success, but we have the toughest economy we've seen in generations. Madam President, the folks we represent expect us to act, and they expect us to find ways to work together and to get past the partisan divide that has made it so difficult for us to make progress. Senator Rubio, what sorts of things have you heard from your constituents in Florida, and how has that motivated you to act?
Thank you, Senator Coons. Let me just point out a couple things before we begin, and that is that there are a lot of issues in this process that we're not going to agree on. And there's an ideological divide about a lot of major issues, the role of government, how do we get the economy growing again, and what government can do about it. And the people of America recognize that, and they recognize that issues of that magnitude ultimately are solved at the ballot box. You elect people. People run for office on their competing visions of government's role, and you decide those elections, and we're going to have one in November of 2012. But what do we do over the next 12 months? Do we just stand around and do nothing? Do we just stand around and continue to bring up pieces of legislation from both sides of the aisle that we know are going to fail just to make political points? Or do we actually begin to act? And there are a lot of reasons why I think we need to act. And I want to share with you an email that I received from Stephanie, who lives in Vero Beach, and it just breaks your heart. I think it's very typical of the one, Senator Coons, that you've probably gotten, and I bet you all of the other members of this institution have gotten. She writes, I'm not sure who to turn to with this question. I'm a true Floridian. I was born and raised in Florida. As you know, the unemployment rate is horrible, and I had to file for unemployment benefits for the first time ever, and I was just informed that I exhausted my benefits. Where do I turn for help? There are no jobs available. I search for a job daily and get excuses such as you don't have enough experience or you're overqualified or I'm suggested to go back to school. How am I going to go back to school if I have no money to pay for school or have no job and no money to pay my bills? It goes on to outline other problems, but at the end it says many people like myself have nowhere to turn. Hopefully you can help me or at least suggest what I can do. Thank you for your time. This is the voice of real desperation, of real people in the real world who want to work, have always worked, and cannot find a job. This is the #1 issue in America. There are a lot of issues floating around here, and they're important issues, but this is the #1 issue in America, of everyday, hard-working people who cannot find a job. Now, can government create jobs for them? In government, but by and large, there are things government can do to help create an environment for job creation. And so what we have done is we have sat down and we have analyzed what things have we agreed on. There are things that are in the President's plan, that are also in the Republicans' plan, that the House has passed, that our colleagues have filed, and what we came up with was this piece of legislation that Senator Coons is going to describe in a moment. It is literally sitting down, it is a collection of bills that we have agreed on. And what people want to know is, I understand you're going to have arguments about the things you disagree on, but why are you arguing about the things you agree on? And so, Senator Coons, maybe this is a good segue to start describing some of the measures that are in this bill, the things that we agree on, the things that we can act on and do right now to help people like Stephanie and people in your home state and people in every one of the states in this country who are struggling to find a job and are looking for some ray of hope that this process here in Washington has an understanding about what they're going through and are actually willing to do something about it.
Well, thank you, Senator Rubio. We together yesterday announced the introduction of the AGREE Act, the American Recovery, Growth, Entrepreneurship and Empowerment Act, which conveniently spells out AGREE. And the core principle, as Senator Rubio has described, was for a real Republican and a real Democrat to look through all the different ideas that have been put out there in the President's Jobs Bill, by the President's Jobs and Competitiveness Council, by members of the Senate and the House from both parties, that we could come to agreement on, and to put them into a bill package, to assemble all these ideas, and to put them out and hope that we will pick up co-sponsors, hope that it will pick up steam, and hope we can demonstrate to the American people, to the families that Senator Rubio and I have heard from in letters and emails and tweets who've expressed real concern. The basic big picture proposals in this bill: first, extending tax relief for small businesses. There's 3 different provisions that have already been in law, but that would be extended by this bill: for capital gains exclusion for 5-year investments in qualified small businesses, for accelerated depreciation, and for increased expensing, all of which would help small businesses invest in growth. Encouraging cutting-edge research and innovation by making permanent the R&D tax credit and by adding something to it that I think has real potential, an added incentive for companies who invent something here to manufacture it here. Another common-sense regulatory relief for fast-growing businesses that seek to go public. Another, an idea originally championed by Senator Casey, providing incentives through the tax code for veterans to become franchise owners and entrepreneurs. And last, reducing some immigration barriers that prevent highly skilled workers who've studied here from staying here. And now really the last point, protecting American businesses from intellectual property theft, strengthening our ability to prevent counterfeit goods from coming into American markets by fixing a small but real barrier to effective border protection against counterfeiting. All of these provisions, Madam President, are provisions that have already enjoyed bipartisan support in other settings. We've simply assembled them together, put them into a common-sense package, and want to move them forward. Senator Rubio, what sort of response has our action gotten so far from people in Florida or around the country who might have contacted you about this initiative?
Thank you. It's been a very positive response, and I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. Number one is every time people open up a newspaper or turn on the television, what they get from Washington is bad news. A week ago in a speech I gave, I said it resembles professional wrestling to them. It seems like there's people from the Republican side and the Democrat side go on TV and scream at each other about what's happening, and people watch it, and they get it, that there are differences between us, but is there anything, I mean, don't we all live in the same country? Aren't we seeing the same economic conditions? Are the things we can work together on, and why are they not hearing from that? Let me tell you the impact in the real world of all that bad news. The impact is that people get scared. So imagine for a moment you are a job creator, and you've got some money to invest this year, and you have to decide, do I leave it in the bank, or do I take this money and use it to grow my business? Well, the safe thing to do is to leave it in the bank. But what job creators and entrepreneurs want to do, what they really want to do is they want to create new jobs. They want to grow their businesses. Who doesn't want to grow their business? Who doesn't want to add customers? So now you have to make a decision. Is now the right time to grow my business or the wrong time? And one of the things people look at is the political climate. Are the people in charge of government, in Washington especially, which is the one that gets the most attention, what is their mind frame? Like, how are they working? Are they getting things done? Is it positive things that are happening or negative things that are happening? And I believe as much as the measures here are meaningful. We're not claiming that this bill solves all of our economic problems, but they are meaningful. If you're a small business that's looking to invest next year and buying some capital and a capital investment in your business, this is a real incentive to extend these tax credits that help you to do that. But more importantly, something else people will look at, they'll be able to open up the newspaper one day and actually read that Republicans and Democrats came together and passed a piece of legislation that they agreed on. And I don't think you can underestimate or quite frankly, really measure the kind of psychological impact that that could have on job creators to actually have some optimism that the future will be better than the present, that tomorrow may be better than today. And I think that as much as anything else is critical. I think we, all of us in public service, but particularly those of us who serve here in this institution, the United States Senate is a big deal. People pay attention to what we say here, the good stuff we say and the bad stuff we say. They pay attention to what we do here and they pay attention to what we fail to do here. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize that our actions have consequences and the way we speak and comport ourselves in these debates. And I think we need to recognize that some of the rhetoric and some of the noise that has been made in this process over the last 6 months to a year have hurt job creation because they've created an air of negativity around economics of this country. And we have an opportunity with the passage of legislation like this to send a message that on the things we agree on, we can actually get things done. That's been the impression I've gotten from people. A little bit of surprise, but a lot of it is some sense of optimism that, in fact, before this year is out, we'll be able to pass a piece of legislation that is both meaningful and bipartisan. Is that the same reaction you've gotten?
That's right, Senator Rubio. I've gotten an almost immediate response from Facebook, from Twitter, from email, from phone calls to my office and to my accounts. I'll just quote a couple of them for a moment, if I might. I got a tweet from @JasonFabry who wrote, "Kudos for introducing job-creating legislation. Good to see detailed plans rather than the endless partisan bickering." And @WisconsinLady tweeted, "If AGREE is a jobs act that can get passed, I, an American who cares deeply about our unemployed, says thanks." I got an email from Mary June from Delaware City. "I think it's great to see a bipartisan approach to solving the jobs crisis. Thank you for getting past party lines and coming together to propose common-sense solutions." And last, Maria from Middletown emailed me, "I think it's time for both parties to come together, to bring our country back to where we have people working again and families believing in the American dream. The same dream I had when I was growing up, the dream I thought my sons and granddaughter were going to live. The business as usual in Washington has to stop, and through this bill, you will both prove to your fellow senators, if you all work together, anything can be possible." To be clear, as Senator Rubio said earlier, there are real differences. There are things that divide the parties. There is time ahead for an election to resolve those fundamental differences in values, in approach, in priorities. But while we can, we should come together with common-sense proposals that demonstrate to the American people that we can take ideas, Republican and Democrat, from the House and Senate, from the states and the President, and put them in a package and pass them. Because 12 months is too long for us to wait. As we all wait this coming week for the outcome of the Super Committee, I know that confidence is one of the major things we have some concerns about. The confidence in the marketplace, the confidence to take risks and invest, the confidence to grow. And in my view, Madam President, this bill, this initiative, shows that both parties can and do have confidence in American inventors, American investors, America's veterans, and America's entrepreneurs. I'm grateful for a chance to work on this. Senator Rubio, what's the next step and where do we go from here?
I hope the next step is to get as many people in this chamber and in the House to sign on to this legislation, and let's get it done. Obviously, we're open to suggestions about how to improve it. Maybe there are some things we left out that should be in there. We're open to that. Maybe there are some questions involving how some of these particular measures would work, and so we're open to suggestions now. I think what we want to do is get the ball rolling, and I know that our time is short here and it's about to run out, and I want to recognize what you've recognized. And let's not, one of the ways you lose credibility is when you exaggerate things. Let's not exaggerate things in terms of the differences between our parties. They're real. There are real ideological differences about the role of government, about what the tax code should look like, about to get out of this debt situation, and we're going to debate those things. So my friends on both the right and the left, the Republican side and the Democrat side, we have real differences, and this is the place to do them. We are fortunate and blessed to live in a republic where we can debate our competing points of view as to what the proper role of government is. But there are things we do agree on. And these are the kinds of things we should work on. And so I think tonight, or this afternoon, or today is an open invitation to all of our colleagues here in the Senate to join us, to look at this bill, analyze it, see if there are things in it you'd like to add that you think belong there. Maybe there are some things we left out that should be in there. The more the merrier. We're looking forward to that. To those who think there are things that are in this bill that maybe should be changed or improved, we're open to those suggestions as well. But we want to get this done. We want to deliver something to the American people as soon as possible that shows that here in Washington, D.C., we can agree on the things we agree on. And I think that would be a positive first step in the right direction on behalf of job creators. I think our time has expired, so with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
President,
Senator from California.
what is the parliamentary status right now?
We're still in morning business with the Republicans controlling 6 more minutes.
We're still in morning business. The Republicans control 6 minutes and 25 seconds.
Madam President, we'll yield back the Republican time so that we can move ahead to report the
Without objection.
Madam President,
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 2354, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 157, H.R. 2354, an act making appropriations for energy and water development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
Madam President, it's my understanding that Senator Bingaman would like to speak on an amendment that he has filed, and that Senator Murkowski may well come down to speak on that amendment, which is fine. And so I'd like to urge Senator Bingaman to do that now.
Madam President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, I appreciate the opportunity to just speak briefly about an amendment that Senator Murkowski and I have filed. There is a provision in the bill, the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, which we're considering here in the Senate, that we would like to see stricken or deleted from the bill. It's a provision in the legislation that mandates the sale of $500 million worth of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or the SPRO, as it's called. The bill also ends the royalty in kind program, and that part I'm not disputing at this point. But the language in the bill that we're concerned about is on page 41, and it says in that part of the bill, it says, notwithstanding various other provisions, the Secretary of Energy shall sell $500 million in petroleum products from the reserve not later than March 1st of 2012, and shall deposit any proceeds from such sales in the general fund of the Treasury. In the words of the Department of Energy, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve exists first and foremost as an emergency response tool which the President can use should the United States be confronted with an economically threatening disruption in oil supplies. The SPRO is our nation's insurance policy against oil supply disruptions, and keeping the SPRO well-stocked and operational is important to our energy security, and I believe that's a view shared by Democrats and Republicans. The SPRO became filled to its maximum capacity of roughly 728 million barrels for the first time in its history in the year 2009. The President, in the budget he submitted, the 2012 budget, he proposed a sale of oil from the SPRO that would generate $500 million in revenue from the Federal Treasury. The administration explained that because the SPRO was at maximum capacity, it needed to sell off some oil for operational purposes. They needed a little extra space in the SPRO in order to move oil around within the system and to refurbish some of the underground salt caves in which the oil is stored. However, this past June, there was an emergency drawdown, and there was a sale of 30 million barrels of SPRO oil. And I understand that the emergency sale generated more than $3 billion. This indicates to me that more than 6 times the amount of oil that the President thought was necessary to be sold for operational reasons have now been sold. Clearly, the President's proposal from February to create a little free space in the SPRO is no longer necessary. The concern we have is that the SPRO sale provision in this legislation remains part of an appropriations bill, and the sale is no longer necessary for operational purposes. It is simply a way of generating revenue. I hope my colleagues will consider the long-term implications of using our strategic oil stocks just to generate revenue for the operation of government on a weekly and monthly basis. I believe this is a bad precedent. I believe we should reject this part of the legislation, and if the opportunity presents itself to offer the amendment, I will be urging our colleagues to join us in deleting this provision and ensuring that any future revenue-generating sales from SPRO oil not be accomplished or proposed simply to pay the ordinary operating bills of the various agencies covered by the legislation. Madam President, I know my colleague from Alaska is expected to come to the floor here in the next few minutes and give her views on this same legislation, which she and I are co-sponsoring, the amendment that I've just spoken about. But until then, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
California.
I want to thank Senator Bingaman.
We're in a quorum call.
I ask the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I want to thank Senator Bingaman for his comments. He has been an excellent chair of the committee. It is our understanding that these points were never brought to the committee. However, I'm told that the Energy Department has told my staff that the budget request is valid due to the Department's need for operational flexibility. I would like everybody to know that the floor is open. If you filed an amendment, please come down to speak on it. If you want to file an amendment, please do so as quickly as possible. But the floor is open for amendments at this time. Thank you, Madam President. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, request that proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I've come to the floor this morning to discuss a provision in the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that apparently Senator Bingaman has just spoken to. This would require the sale of $500 million worth of oil from our nation's Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or we call it the SPRO. I do believe that this is an inappropriate use of our limited emergency stockpiles, and I think it would also set a dangerous and an unsustainable precedent for the future. Now, as I understand it, the administration first requested this sale in its fiscal year 2012 budget proposal and justified it by asserting that there was an integrity issue in one of the caverns where the SPRO oil was stored. We heard this discussion before the Energy Committee some months ago. And they asserted that the sale was necessary because DOE had to drain the oil in that cavern to perform some repairs that were apparently necessary. The House Appropriations Committee subsequently authorized the sale in its version of the bill, which was then released in June. So at that point in time, based on DOE's representation, it was, I guess it was kind of hard not to argue that this sale was not justified. But then events took a different course. Several weeks later, as part of a coordinated effort with the IEA to increase global supplies, the President chose to sell about 6 times more crude from the SPRO than the House had originally contemplated. Now, whether you supported that sale or not, I think it would have been reasonable to assume or to expect that the administration would sell the crude from the cavern that needed the repairs. They needed to get that out so that they could do the necessary repairs. So when an announced sale comes, you would think that they would take the oil from that cavern, thereby solving at least one of the problems and obviating the need for future maintenance-related sale. Enough oil has now been sold from our emergency reserves to fill not 1, but 6 troubled caverns. The only justification that really can remain now is the need for more cash. We need more money. Given that background, I would encourage that the Senate consider that selling $500 million worth of our emergency oil reserves right now simply to help offset other appropriations. It's like cashing out our insurance policy in order to cover the cost of a mortgage that we can't afford in the first place. The SPRO was designed to be that emergency safety net, if you will, or really like an insurance policy. Remember, there's a very good reason why we have this insurance policy in the first place. Congress created the SPRO in the aftermath of the oil embargo back in the 70s to serve as a safety net in the event that we were to see a major supply disruption. And given the volatility that continues to churn the global markets, our strategic stockpile is arguably more important today than ever before. So as long as we maintain a large volume of oil within the SPRO, we will ensure that Americans have some level of protection against future disruptions. And if we decide not to take the long view, we face the very real risk of being forced to spend more tomorrow to repurchase that oil that is being sold today. Now you may ask, well, how likely is any kind of a future disruption? And I would tell you that the odds are still higher than we would like. Our nation remains roughly 50% dependent on foreign oil, importing close to 9 million barrels a day at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. The world, as we know, is not exactly stable. Large volumes of Libyan oil remain offline. Iran continues to provoke its neighbors, raising the specter of future attacks. Saudi Arabia's leadership is aging rapidly, leaving the door open to perhaps future unrest and upheaval. China, India, many of the other countries are rapidly expanding their oil consumption, and in the meantime, forging close relationships with major suppliers that can be leveraged in times of emergency. Here at home, the federal government continues to hinder the development of new supplies that would improve our energy security and reduce the need for a strategic reserve. We've seen development halted or delayed in Alaska, up in the northern part of the state, in the Rocky Mountain West, a number of other areas. The new 5-year leasing plan for offshore development does take a few small steps, but it keeps both the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts under a de facto moratorium through at least 2017. The administration has also delayed its decision on the Keystone XL pipeline. We just saw that news this week. This would have carried significant volumes of Canadian oil. Again, that's oil from an ally, from a neighbor, that would have brought that into this country. So, Madam President, the result is that we're not doing, in my opinion, nearly enough to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. So we still need a strategic petroleum reserve, and we cannot treat it like a national ATM that can be tapped when the money is tight here. That's just not the reason that we should have or utilize a SPRO. I want to share a quote from a witness who testified before the Energy Committee earlier this year. His name's Kevin Book. He's a real expert on energy policy, and I think he made quite an impression on our committee. He encouraged us to seek out alternatives to petroleum, but he also said, and I'll quote him here, selling oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to pay for efficiency gains and alternative fuels could seriously diminish U.S. energy security without necessarily delivering financial benefits. That's the end of his quote. For anybody that might be interested, I'm happy to provide a copy of his testimony. I think it was really quite useful in understanding why this approach is really just not appropriate at this point in time. So, Madam President, as we seek to pay for legislation that comes before us, whether it's this appropriations bill or something else, I continue to believe that one of our best paths forward is to produce more of our own abundant resources and then put the resulting federal revenues to good use. Instead of selling our emergency oil and risking future dilemma, we should instead put policies in place that expand and that accelerate the pace at which we develop our immense natural resources. Right now, Alaska has about 40 billion barrels of oil that are just waiting to be tapped for the good of the nation. I keep saying that we've got money that's buried in the ground up there. If we harness those resources and more of the resources in the Gulf of Mexico, the Rocky Mountain West, we would be dramatically increasing our energy security. We'd create tens of thousands of new jobs. We'd generate billions and billions of dollars year after year that could be applied to both deficit reduction and the development of new energy technologies. Madam President, I would encourage the Senate to support any amendment that strikes the SPRO provision in this bill and encourage us instead to focus on the development of a more viable long-term energy policy. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, during the summer, Democrats and Republicans, as Americans well remember, had a big political dust-up over trying to reduce spending as we approached the nation's debt limit. As we know, the product of that fight was a leadership-brokered deal that promised long-term savings in discretionary spending of around $900 billion. It also created, that is, over 10 years, not just in 1 year, it also created the Super Committee, which has been meeting in secret to find another $1.2 trillion in possible savings. We hope they do. They should do more than that, frankly. Whatever they come up with must be voted on in the Senate, though, without any amendment, cannot be altered in any way. And this is concerning to me. Virtually every deal we've seen this year has been filled with promises of savings, but when you analyze them, the savings are not nearly as real as promised. So we don't need one more plan with tax hikes that never go away and promises of spending cuts that don't materialize or aren't continued. Indeed, the debt limit deal, which produced the Budget Control Act this summer, claims to contain a spending cap. But that is not accurate. It's a phony cap. The cuts that matter most are, in many respects, those that take place right away, of course. But after all that fussing and drama, we ended up with a deal that cut discretionary spending by only a paltry $7 billion from fiscal year 2012's discretionary budget. So last year, 11 discretionary budget. So to put this number in perspective, the total outlays for 2011 are $145 billion greater than 2010, and our deficit is nearly $1.3 trillion, $1,300 billion deficit. We're talking about promising a $7 billion reduction in spending. Nevertheless, $7 billion in discretionary cuts at least is real, a step, however small, in the right direction, right? We're supposed to spend $1,043 billion this year, down $7 billion from the $1,050 billion in discretionary spending expected. Unfortunately, last year. Unfortunately, this is just one more empty promise. Because the bill was rushed through, this Budget Control Act, in the 11th hour of the 59th minute, nobody knew that there was a gimmick in it at the time. Here's how it worked. The Budget Control Act created a cap adjustment for disaster relief funding. That's what they called it. It took a 10-year average for emergency spending and estimated that to be $11.3 billion for 2012. But this $11.3 billion in the Budget Control Act is a new fund, and it is spent by regular appropriations, not by 60 votes, as in the past for emergency spending, and it is above the $1,043 billion figure. So the truth is that the bill is not and never was $1,043 billion as promised, a limit on spending to that amount, but $1,054 billion. Spending, therefore, for discretionary accounts this year will be larger than last year. And the writers of the bill went on further. They changed the Senate rule in this Budget Control Act that was passed at the 59th minute of the 11th hour to eliminate the 60-vote rule even for emergency spending above the $11.3 billion. So the 60-vote point of order, which has been used here over the years to challenge a designation as an emergency spending, has been stripped as part of a bill denominated as a Budget Control Act. So the new fund can be spent, this 11.3, at any time as a normal appropriation, as if it were within the budget and without any 60-vote requirement. This eliminates pressure to stay within the budget or to offset annual disaster spending, as we've been attempting to do, a number of us has in recent years. For instance, if you have $2 billion in disaster spending as part of a particular appropriation, instead of eliminating $2 billion in waste somewhere else in the budget to keep your total spending within the budget, you have a free access to the $11 billion fund and don't have to worry about offsetting a penny. You also don't need a vote for disaster funding approval. So this little offset issue has grown as a tribute to the effectiveness of Senator Tom Coburn, who has been fighting to offset so-called emergency spending designations, and the 60-vote requirement to pass an emergency bill gave him some leverage and ability to challenge that spending and challenge the appropriators to try to find offsets for the new spending. So I think we might call this, instead of the Budget Control Act, the Coburn Control Act. And I don't think it's a step forward for us. So the real spending cap now is $1,054 billion, $4 billion more than what we spent last year. And only if you want to spend even more than that do you need to go through an emergency designation process, but you don't need 60 votes even for that. So the irony here is that there was widespread belief in this chamber that we needed to tighten emergency spending designations. It was being abused. To give one unbelievable example, the Senate counted $210 million in the routine funding for the census as an emergency spending. And the census is in the Constitution. It's required to be conducted every 10 years. How in the world can we say this is unexpected emergency spending? It's as routine as anything can possibly be. But it was done because otherwise you would need to cut spending by $200 million somewhere else. But the Budget Control Act has succeeded in actually weakening the standard for emergency spending and creates just one more loophole for the spenders. Again, the effect of the $11 billion fund is that it effectively nullifies the cap that we were promised. And the Appropriating Committee will have no incentive to achieve savings when they can spend every penny of the $1,043 billion base budget, knowing there's still another $11 billion to be spent when they run through the first part. So the evidence of this is before our very eyes. To this point, in one form or another, 7 appropriation bills have come before the Senate floor. 4 of them have been voted on and passed. Energy and water bill is before us this week. We should have been considering each of these bills individually, doing our due diligence on each one, but we haven't. We've moved in group. But I am glad that this bill, energy and water, will be considered on its own, not bundled with others. The bad news is that the 7 bills we've seen on the floor so far have already increased spending by $9 billion of the $11 billion for disaster, and we're well on our way to using every cent of the $11 billion because we have 6 more bills to pass. So the energy and water bill on the floor now increases spending over the budget amount by $1 billion. That may seem small in Washington terms, but that kind of thinking is the reason we're going broke. $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon, it's real money. If we can't even reach the paltry goal, honestly, of a $7 billion reduction in spending, how on earth can we tackle our $15 trillion debt, $15,000 billion debt? Or consider food stamp programs. Federal welfare spending is now about $700 billion a year, $700 billion a year in the total welfare programs. It's more than 900 when you count state obligations or contributions that they make to these programs. Food stamps are the fastest growing major item in the welfare budget. They've quadrupled in 10 years. There are the food stamp program is one of 18 federal nutritional support programs in the budget. One of 18. The number of people receiving food stamps has climbed from about 1 in 50 when the program began to almost 1 in 7 today. Some of the more than 45 million people receiving food stamps exceed the program's eligibility requirements. They have higher income or higher assets than you're supposed to have to qualify. But they receive the benefits because they get them as a reciprocal benefit for other federal benefits that they get. They qualify for one program, they're categorically, therefore, entitled to food stamp programs, even though they don't meet the basic requirements. And reports of fraud and abuse are widespread. We were promised recommendations by the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee for how the Super Committee could achieve savings in the agriculture budget, of which food stamps is the largest component of the entire agriculture budget, by far dwarfing other expenditures like aid to farmers. And they were supposed to arrive, the senator promised, by November 1st, but we've not seen that yet. So, the sad truth is, our Democratic-led Senate has not met its responsibility to help this nation confront its most serious threat, and that is the debt we have. It's the greatest economic danger of our time, as we've repeatedly been warned. If we ultimately fail to control federal spending, which has nearly doubled in 10 years, we will experience a debt crisis that leads to loss of jobs, loss of growth, and loss of economic opportunity. Such a crisis will hurt those with less income the most. It's our duty to stop the occurrence of this very preventable tragedy. Instead of the irresponsible spending favored by the political class, it's time for Washington to be more accountable, to focus on the middle class. That means creating jobs through the private sector, producing more American energy, keeping our wealth at home, making the government lean and productive, a servant of the American people, confronting our dangerously rising debt which threatens our economy and jobs, adopting a globally competitive tax code, upholding the rule of law and trade, eliminating unwise, damaging regulations, and finally, delivering the good people of this country the honest and responsible budget they deserve. Mr. President, we've got a long way to go. I'm disappointed that we can't even comply with the intent of the Budget Control Act passed this summer. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor. The absence